Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? You were going to hear this the day before Valentine's Day, 2024. Are you being a good partner to yourself? Whether you have a partner or you don't have a partner, are there things you're wanting for Valentine's Day, and can you treat yourself to them and kind of be your own Valentine? That's all I'm going to say about that. This episode with Jen, we talk about some really great things. I think there's so much depth in here. We talk about, do we ask for what we want? And if we have a bid for communication, do we communicate that? And Jen and I went through something recently and I realized I wasn't communicating, and how we've made that change. We talk about attachment wounds and when we are in relationship with people that we can work through our attachment wounds, it's really an active service to the relationship. We talk about the balance between ADHD and wanting novelty, but maybe needing structure and routine, and how we can fight that. We talk about how it's possible for therapists to inflict some trauma on clients who are neurodivergent by misinterpreting our need for depth and processing and being kind of in our stuff until we're ready to not be in our stuff. How cognitive behavioral therapy can sometimes feel like gaslighting to clients. If you're a client and you feel like your therapist isn't getting you or is trying to get you to not be anxious or not think about things or not worry about things. This is a very nuanced conversation, and we just touch on this, but does your therapist or coach get you? And we talk about what can go on for an autistic person or a neurodivergent person and what can be helpful and what can't. Obviously, it's a short conversation, so there's much more to this. We talk about many times if we're assigned female at birth, we're femmes. We are socialized to be focused on everybody else and meeting their needs with masking. And do we know what we want? That can also be a way to lessen our pathological demand avoidance, to have a sense of autonomy. If we can meet everybody else's needs, then nobody's going to be making demands on us. I talk about my struggle when I wanted to get food when nobody was home, and how hard it is for me to ask for what I want sometimes. How many of us don't like conflict. We don't want to have hard conversations. When we set boundaries, it can be very dysregulating. We also talk about becoming our own heroine, and if we are having that sense of abandonment or rejection in friendships, how we can reframe that and identify what we want from relationships and being there for ourselves. And the thing that we talk about just a little bit in the end is, if you are suspecting that you're autistic or recently diagnosed, it's not uncommon to have some skill regression, to start feeling like you're really autistic, things that you were able to do before you're not able to do anymore. The grief, the validation, the shaking up of your identity if you are suspecting or recently diagnosed autistic. So we touch on a lot of things in this episode. I think it's very rich, and I'm just going to let you listen to it now. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia.
We were just talking before we started that this may be the episode that doesn't make it. I always feel like if I should say that, because if you're hearing that, then this is not happening. But anyways, how are you doing?
I love it. I love that you said it. That made me laugh.
I know.
How am I doing? Let's see. I'm a little sleepy. I didn't sleep well last night. We had a big windstorm and rainstorm, and I didn't lose power, but a dear friend did. So it was not a typical school night, and there's some flooding. So one of my kids is home. And how am I doing? I'm doing all right. I'm learning some lessons that aren't all that easy to learn, and recently had a change in my schedule where I'm now 90% of the time parent instead of 50% of the time parent, and the structure for the kids and the structure that I need, and the wake ups and dinner every night. And like, it's just a big change. There's a lot of change afoot, but I'm doing okay. I'm tired, but how's that song go? I don't know. I'll make up my own lyrics. I'm tired, but I'm plucky and optimistic. and scrappy.
Sounds good.
So I'm figuring it out.
It seems like the structure has been a positive call to action for you.
Yes.
What I'm observing is I think that your ADHD fights structure, and probably your PDA too, but because you're needing to be more present and do a lot more, that you've really had to get some structure into place, not rigid structure, but it feels like it, at least currently, it's working for you and for your family. It just means that a lot more of your energy has to be more focused and directed. And I think if you're someone who struggles with liking novelty and work better with structure but resist it, this is probably pretty relatable.
Nice to know I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been good. Oh, I just had a thought and then I lost it. I had an interesting moment the other day where when I've been talking about it as a family, me and the kids, and kind of what the opportunities are and what would be good for us, and getting some buy-in, right? Power with my children instead of power over them is definitely a very cherished value and really like a North Star for me. It helps me orient as a mother, as a parent. And I let them know, like, I was used to having this time alone too, right? And what I didn't want to get into was taking time to myself, feeling guilty that I was taking time to myself, being unable to pull the resources of that time by myself. And then when I'm with them, not being able to fully be with them because I'm resenting like that I don't have the time that I need for myself to recharge my batteries. And we had a really beautiful conversation about all of this stuff, and also just acknowledging that the period of transition is a stressful period, even though we're dealing with it very, very well on the whole. And I had one of my children came up to me, and I just kind of broke my heart a little bit. Like, they were sad, actually. I didn't have that information yet, but I knew I was not emotionally available in that moment. And I had to take care of something because I'm a single parent, like, you're juggling. I'm juggling a million things. And I was able to go back to her a little while later and be like, I just want to acknowledge that I was not emotionally available when you came to me, and now realize that you came to me with some sadness, and that's not how I would have wanted to show up for you in that moment. And it was almost like asking for a do-over, but it was like acknowledging that that happened. It's also okay that that happened. And I am here for you. Like, I'm here. Like, and now I and thank gosh, she was receptive to that, and we were able to reconnect. So it's just a little example of partnering with in that way. And I think it was pretty good modeling, because as human beings, we do have our limitations. And after having lived my life, like, not acknowledging said limitations and then feeling guilty and terrible about it, it feels really good. So
yeah, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good lesson. It's really, there's a lot on that other side of recovering perfectionist here, right? Like,
yeah.
That's how I'm doing, Patricia. How are you today?
I'm okay. And you know, what's going on in my head is I'm having this, I can't think of the word, like, it's incongruent, because my head says I should be doing fine. I got up, I took a walk this morning. I'm really working, since I haven't been getting in the pool. I've really been working on walking more. I have a thing around numbers. I think if you have a brain like mine, you like numbers. And I had a Fitbit a couple of years ago, and, would be marching by my bed at night to meet my step goal at night, which was okay for the time being. And then I had an idea of what amount of movement worked for me, but I'm back to counting steps and miles and tracking distance. There's this walk that we take the dog on, and it's like 1.4 miles, which annoys me because I want it to be 1.5. And I took the dog for a walk the other day and was able to make 2 miles. And this morning, and I'm experimenting, because when I walk the dog in the evening, I don't think I'm sleeping as well. So I'm also practicing with how much movement does my body need, how much relaxes me, how much stimulates me. So Steve and I did the shorter walk this morning, and then he came home. The dog kept pulling and wanting to go with him, but we did what should have been the 2-mile walk, and it turned out to be 1.8 miles. I'm really mad about that. Like, how could I have walked the same way that I did before, and it was 2 miles before and 1.8 miles today? And if you were someone who likes numbers and that part of it, I don't know if it's my ADHD. I don't know if it's how, it probably is, of how I gamify things. because so much of what I've been struggling with that we're going to talk about is like initiating. I got some art supplies because I decided like what I'm getting joy out of right now is color. So I bought I bought, I feel like I'm being very inarticulate. I got a Grinch bathroom set for Christmas and I put it up and I loved it. And then I got more Grinch things for Christmas and I bought some Christmas bedding and just, it really brought me joy. When I took all that stuff down, I thought, the comforter that I have is very summery, springy, and it's still feeling wintry. So I bought new bedding, new pillows, and decided to get new things for the bathroom. And I wanted to paint a wooden Kleenex holder box to match the color of the new color scheme. I got new towels. Like I'm really enjoying having this time. Shopping in stores like Home Goods that have colors and textures just is incredibly, it's like being at a candy store. It's visually touching things and seeing the colors and the shapes. It's just really very satisfying for me. But
it's yummy.
It really is. And so what happened was, I think I texted you the other night, and you and I have talked about this for a long time with my rejection sensitive dysphoria. I don't want to be too much. And I often am not very direct with you. In my mind, I'm being very direct, but if I look at the communication, it's not direct at all. And I think I texted you like, I bought the paints, I have everything, and I just can't get myself going. And earlier that day, I think I'd sent you a picture of, I think I got a Squishmallow. And so I sent you a picture of that. And it was later in the afternoon and you responded with a heart on the Squishmallow and then didn't respond to this struggle that I'm having that in my mind, I'm clearly asking you to respond. And I'm not. I'm just giving you information. And I really processed it. And you've talked to me about, pull me in, rein me in. I have a lot going on. And I really thought about it. And so I texted, I said, that was a bid for communication. And then I said, in my mind, it was very clear, but I recognize it wasn't. And I can't remember if we ended up texting or FaceTiming. We FaceTimed because
I think I FaceTimed you.
You responded and then I started to cry. Wounds. It's wounding. Mm-hmm. And how often does this happen for us that we're wanting connection? I didn't consciously identify it. And when you responded warmly, all of a sudden, all of these tears came up. But what I noticed was different is because this like rinse and repeat, we've been here over and over. It took me 5 minutes. I really did not have that much to cry about because I think I was being very present with it. And then we talked about what was going on with you and we just had this connection. And since then, when I have texted you, because our agreement is if we need something, we text, we don't use Marco Polo, that I've been more aware of when is it a bid for connection and when is it just communicating. And a few times I have said, this is a bid for connection. For me, it feels like it's so significant and honoring for me. Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to respond, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to be there, doesn't mean that you're not going to be busy and involved with things. And with my PDA profile, pathological demand avoidance or pervasive drive for autonomy, that can be really risky because if I'm letting you know what I need and even acknowledging that can activate this sense of a loss of autonomy. And there's enough trust in our relationship that I know that you'll be here for me if you're able to, that it's creating more intimacy.
Yes. Beautifully said. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I love watching us both because, of course, I have my version of this and my version of attachment wounds that you create space for. And it's funny, on Facebook the other day, someone had like reshared something from a couple of years ago that I think we had said on the podcast about this. And I think I've said it this way before, like it's an act of service to the relationship that I'm so thankful for. Right. And of course, the wanting to be there. And I'm so glad.
Yeah.
And often it doesn't take much, but acknowledgement, and we overcomplicate things as humans. Like if we've got to feel it to heal it, it's really just honoring the emotion as it comes up, naming it.
Yeah.
Letting it flow.
Yeah.
Right.
I think initially when there's been a lot of wounding, I think much more time needs to be focused on that wound. I was just reading something in a Facebook group and it was for neurodivergent folks. And the question was something to the effect of what do you do when somebody ruminates or won't let go or really gets stuck in things? And that's not quite the language. And I often see these types of questions, and I'm not saying that this necessarily was in this post, but sometimes the language feels ableist because the expectation from someone who is neurotypical and doesn't understand a neurodivergent brain is, why can't you get over it? Why don't you let it go? How come you're always talking about what feels negative? How come you go to catastrophic thinking, which is really, it's very harmful. And if you're neurodivergent, you probably have trauma because you're neurodivergent, because people don't understand. And we get these messages, my wound is too much. And everybody has their own version of the wound. And so if you are a client or a therapist, and this is showing up in your personal life or in your practice, really, there's got to be room for that wound, the grief, the sadness, the anger, all of those feelings to be really attended to and healed. And the goal is not to be any less of those things. It's to embrace that when I go through something, I know I'm going to think about it and talk about it and process it as much as I need to, because that is how my brain is wired to work things out. And for anybody that tells me that I'm not doing it right, or it's too much, or I need to stop talking about things, that is about their capacity and not my ability. And I think this is how we are incredibly harmed as neurodivergents, by often well-intent therapists who, want to use cognitive behavioral therapy and tell us, to just change our thoughts, which can feel incredibly gaslighty. And if I move through that wound, kind of like what I had to do is I had to sort of change my thinking. So I'm not saying that all changing your thinking is bad. I had to change my thinking and put in some new thoughts. My RSD says, I'm too much. I don't want to bother you. You should have known that I was trying to reach out to you. You don't care. You're busy. I mean, all of these things either about you or about me. And then I had to go, wait, Jenna said to pull her in. It was a bid for communication. To me, it was very clear. The fact is it's not. And if I want things to be different, then I need to do something differently. And am I willing to risk? And I was, and it worked out beautifully. So there is this part that after we attend to what that wound is, then we have to look at, is what I'm doing working? And do I want to change it? And is it being ableist if it's trying to do something to fit in? And is there a cost to that? But what is it that I'm wanting, and which is the best or the worst thing that I have to do in order to get that? So it meant I had to be willing to be uncomfortable. Are you going like, screw you, or I don't have time, or not responding? But there's also enough trust in the relationship.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And just testing it out. I mean, just bringing it. I think we talked a while ago about if you really want a vibrant relationship, you have to take those risks. Right? You almost have to risk the loss of the relationship to show up really authentically. And then that's where you keep making space for each other.
Yeah.
Staying curious.
Yeah. I think that can be hard because many people do not like conflict. Many people believe that rupture and repair should not be part of the relationship, that if they can figure out how to do things, and because there's often so much shame involved with having to talk about what's not working, it can be really painful to bring up things that aren't working. I'm trying to think of what it was. Something happened last night. Oh, it's just eluding me. I know oftentimes I'll say something to my husband. He's like, I'm sorry, I should have known that. I'm like, how would you have known that? And I said, I feel bad because I don't want to bring things up because it often activates shame for him, or him apologizing in a way like he should have had this information. And how is he supposed to have the information? And he comes from a family where kind of conflict is not a great thing. And he would much rather keep the peace than to have difficult conversations. I see him having difficult conversations and really challenging this, not only with me, but in some other relationships. And it's because I value that, it's exciting for me to see. And I think he's feeling very empowered with stepping into kind of reframing things. But we've had to talk a lot about why, instead of looking at it as conflict being bad, that you may have more closeness. Like you either find out that the person has the capacity, or you find out that they don't, and you find people that are better suited, or you lower your expectations. But in some of these relationships, he's getting a great reconnection because he was willing to have a difficult conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I know, to stay in integrity, I'm just thinking about all the ways in which like I'm learning that with my boundary setting, and that it really is okay.
Yeah. I think boundaries can be really challenging for us, and we often create relationships that, I think whatever our wound is, we will continue to try and work that out because that's how healing works. And boundaries can be challenging. They can be very dysregulating. You don't always feel great after you set a boundary, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth setting that boundary. And the more I do this work, the more I'm really stepping into this strength and conviction that how we are wired is okay, and having needs and asking for those needs is okay. I still really struggle with it. My son and his girlfriend were here for a few days. They just left this morning. And on Monday, my husband and son and the girlfriend went to the mountains for the day. And it didn't work for me to go because I had some clients. But I asked for one thing that I'd seen there before, and they looked for it. And when they came home at the end of the day, they came in with bags of all this stuff that they had gotten. And my husband's telling me about the day, and I just had to say, like, did you get what I asked for? And he's like, they didn't have it. I felt like I was on pins and needles. And I wanted to get food out that day. And when the kids are here, they eat out all the time. I usually am at home working, so I don't go with them. I had time to go pick up food. I knew what I wanted. Like, I just couldn't get myself to do it. And I don't have DoorDash or Grubhub, and I could figure out how to do it, but I have this resistance to it, which I think you and I, Jen, are going to have a private conversation about this at some point. But that night, my husband said, like, what do y'all want to do for dinner? And I said, I'm really wanting Greek food, and I'm feeling kind of on a pity party that y'all went out and you got stuff and you had a great time. And I'm feeling like I didn't get anything. And my husband was like, great, I'm happy to go out and get it for you. Like, everybody was very accommodating. And the next day, they're like, what do you want to get? We know that we've been out and doing things. Like, everybody's accommodating. But I have this resistance sometimes about asking for what I want, allowing myself to have what I want. And often things feel complicated to me, or by the time I recognize I'm hungry, I just want something now and I don't want to wait. I mean, there are so many aspects of this that make decision-making challenging. Last night, my son and girlfriend and I were out, and we were coming home. We talked about dinner, and I said what I wanted, but I wasn't hungry. We hit traffic. And of course, we walk in the door, and I'm like, now I'm hungry and now I want it. But I don't want to go out again. So...
Yeah.
And I know this is relatable. I see you nodding your head, Jen.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, it's funny as you're talking, and I'm kind of thinking about my own tendencies to avoid conflict and tendencies to people please. And there's good reasons why we do that. Like, there's definitely, a feeling that I want to avoid. And I was noticing the other day, like, this people pleasing or wanting everyone to like you, like when you start with the boundaries, I mean, sometimes it turns out that people respond better to our boundaries and it works out, and those are our people, right? And then it's going to happen. Like, you're going to come face to face with that discomfort of someone just, you are not their cup of tea. And I remember feeling that, having the realization, oh, like, this is what I need to grow. This is what I need to tolerate. I mean, if you're going to make that effort into examining, and I like to bring a playful energy, right? So playing with these tendencies, making space for that uncomfortable feeling when someone takes a step back or unfriends you, and when I was like, oh, this is that other end of the stick. Like, you pick up one end of the stick and you get both ends, you don't get to choose.
Right.
That I was like, ooh, okay, so this is why. This makes sense. This is why I've been avoiding this discomfort. And can I breathe? And the problem with our nervous systems is that, like, that can really register like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And so it can be tremendous. It can be a lot of energy to hold, and that's when we see the big feelings, right? The big emotions, and holding space for them. Right. Of course, having a partner in this, whether it's a friendship, like we experience, I go to my own therapy, having that space holder to just let your nervous system like do its big freak out is really important. I find it's an unavoidable part of the process for me. Right.
I also find that there are certain areas where it's much easier for me to set boundaries than other areas where I struggle more with boundaries. I notice with my kids, it's much harder. And we've had the kids coming and going, and either the kids have had COVID or the partners have had COVID, and, or the partners' siblings have had COVID, and trying to figure out how to navigate that, even though we've asked them to test. And sometimes I have a sense of what might be the better choice, but I'm not willing to not do that, and just being okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking about just like the necessity too, like when, my kids were swapping houses a bit more, and it was like, 2 days at mom's and 2 days at dad's, and then 3 days, and then we'd flip. It was much harder for me to have boundaries, right? Because it was more easy breezy.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just, I don't know, the interaction of also just the environment and the circumstances and keeping yourself in context. Like it looks a lot different when, a lot's had to happen, right? Like my schedule shifted. The nights that I normally had off and would see clients had to be spread out. So now I'm seeing one client in the evening and getting dinner. And I'm like, guys, like I need to be unconscious by 10, the latest, if I'm going to be up at 6 a.m. to do it all over again. And so the boundaries gotten easier. I think that's why there was a lot with COVID that we had to negotiate a lot of boundaries and talk about a lot more. And I do think that it was really good for us, uncomfortable, but good to just be honest and start talking about these things a little bit better. And, if you find that that's true for you, how can we generalize some of those skills?
Right. Right. Well, one of the things it's very vague in my head, but I was talking with someone recently and I can't remember if it was a friend or a client, but the topic was this idea of like not being picked or not being chosen and that feeling of loneliness, not having the friendship, the connection. And I can't remember if there was an aspect of being rejected. I think so many of us are so socialized to try and figure out what everybody else wants and to be what we think everybody else wants. And if you're autistic, if you struggle with social skills, if you have things that make it hard for you to make friends, keep friends, then you're going to struggle even more with this. And so there's so much focus on being picked and being rejected. And part of what we talked about is, let's talk about what it is that you want in a relationship. What are your values? And some of the things that we talked about are reciprocity and honest communication and being able to have conflict and not ghosting. If there's a problem, to have the courage to say, this is what's going on and this isn't working for me, or this is what I need. That what are those things that are really important for you to have in a relationship, honoring that you're wired differently. We're in California, so if you're anywhere else but California, feel free to laugh and discount us. But we're using the heat, and Steve and I have very different thermostats. And part of my irritability is, like, I was walking around barefoot the other morning because it was so freaking hot in here. And I want to put on a sweatshirt and I want to put on socks, and it was so hot. And my husband has a right to feel comfortable, but I sleep with the windows open at night. So how do we honor these differences and not make each other wrong? But part of what we talked about, not my husband and I, but in this situation I'm telling you about, is what are your values? And does this person who you're feeling hurt and disappointed by, do you choose them? Based on your values and what you want in a relationship, are they showing up in a way that meets your needs? And if you have a PDA profile, there can be a tremendous amount of dysregulation and loss of autonomy when somebody doesn't return our texts, doesn't respond to us, cancels plans, whether it's intentional or unintentional. That PDA is going to, or the RSD is going to go into either feeling rejection or this loss of autonomy, which is going to make it even harder, because then things feel really big and we can feel very out of control and have very big feelings. Part of how we maintain that sense of autonomy is this behavior that's happening, is there a better explanation for it? Like if it's you and me, Jen, are you busy? Do you have your kids? There's trust there. So I'm less likely to go into, oh, she's blowing me off, she always does that. Like that's not part of the narrative because we have security in our relationship. You can do those reality checks, but do you choose the behavior that this person is having? And that's a way to have more autonomy. I think especially for those of us that are femmes, AFABs, assigned female at birth, we are so socialized to meet everybody else's needs and to want to be chosen and to be picked. Look at all the Disney movies. Find your prince, have him wake you up, have him rescue you, have him save you. When are we going to become the heroine of our own stories, where we get to choose and we have more empowerment over this?
Yes. Thank you so much for articulating. I felt like I needed that pep talk too. So thank you.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Not just your client that got to benefit from that, but yeah, absolutely all of that. I mean, I was working with my own therapist and talking about, if we're talking about significant others, romantic relationships, we're talking about just needing a new love story, where instead of just being true to someone, like you're true to yourself and then you share that. And I know that for me, many, many years, my chosen strategy was not to have any needs, not to have any wants, to figure out what the other person needed and wanted and to be that. And I think you were the one that said it to me. You're like, of course, like nobody's going to break up with you. Like you like try to be like as there for the person and as perfect for the person. But I was really hurting.
Yeah.
I was hustling and I had a lot of untended attachment wounds, right? That were just underneath there. Because of course we have needs. Okay? Of course we need to take up space and in our relationships and to be received. And even if sometimes that's a little bit of effort, like those conflicts are invitations to deepen intimacy.
Yep.
Intimacy, like there's something going on here. And the person I was the most cut off from was myself.
Right.
So, and that's like, I see that now through the lens of like, wow, that's a whole lot of masking. That's just, and it's all, when we kind of do this somewhat painful self-reflection a lot of the time, I need to remind myself, and I remind plenty of people all the time, like it came from somewhere, right? Like there's some of this wholesomeness like underlying it. It's an attempt to take care of ourselves. It's an attempt to, and often these patterns are formed when we are half-baked. We are not fully developed, and then we're sort of bringing them into consciousness and reevaluating them and well into adulthood sometimes.
Yeah.
If ever. And sometimes, people just don't.
Well, and being other focused is such a great way of masking because we're focused on the other person. And it's a great way for self-regulation if you have a PDA profile. Because if I'm looking at anything that you could need, then you're not going to be making any demands of me, which is going to regulate my nervous system. And then you're going to appreciate how much I'm doing. And so that feeds that cycle. And I want to emphasize that there is nothing wrong with reciprocity, mutuality, interdependence. We do not have to be islands unto ourselves. And it's important. I mean, I count on you a lot for co-regulation. And that works for both of us. Does it work all the time? No. Is that normal? Of course. So I want to be very clear that I'm not demonizing any of these things, but it's when it's mutually agreed and it works for both people. My husband is great at co-regulating me. And we've talked about like he's walking the dog with me a lot these days because I'm just having a hard time. Although I did take the dog for that 2-mile walk that didn't register 2 miles today. But that, the fact that I went when he wasn't here because they were in the mountains and I was working that night and I thought I really want to get some steps in. But it's really okay if you're recognizing yourself in any and all of this or some of it, that's okay. And I guess the other little thing we kind of need to wrap up, but I've been reading a lot of posts about people that are just recognizing that they're autistic and all of a sudden they feel really autistic. And we can have skill regression and just notice how hard things are and things that we normally used to be able to do, now we can't. That is just all part of the diagnosis and this awareness. And I've been thinking about things that I did in my 20s, 30s, and 40s that like I just refused to do today. And I think when I was younger, I liked the connection. I liked the novelty. My ADHD was probably riding more forefront than my autism. And I'm much more clear today about the things that work and don't work. And I've said to you, Jen, like I just feel so friggin' autistic since being diagnosed. That is normal and that is part of the trajectory.
Yeah, I'm so curious. I took one of the screening tests the other day, and it's funny. I know that from my experience, if I'm looking at that, it's the lesson right now is the centering myself, being able to, instead of looking at whatever decade of my life, right, through the lens of feedback from others, like the mirrors that were around me, instead of more like what was I experiencing, instead of just what were people telling me about who I was or what I needed to be, or, so yeah, I can, it's a wild ride.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. If you are just realizing that you're autistic or you've just been diagnosed, it is a roller coaster. There's validation, there's normalization, there's joy, but I'll tell you, there is grief and sadness. And it feels like if your identity was a snow globe, somebody just shook the heck out of that thing. And what am I masking? What am I not masking? Who am I? Who am I underneath all of this? And these are all very, very common things that happen around recognizing that we have a new identity.
Yeah. Yeah. They're great questions.
Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so, my dear. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We don't have to trash this one. This one turned out pretty good.
I will leave that up to you.
All right. Thanks for being here, Jen.
All right. Bye, dear.
All right. Bye. Hey again. My guess is you probably heard at least one thing that resonated for you, but hopefully a bunch of stuff because we really touched on a lot of great things today. If any of the things that you heard about resonate and you're struggling and you want some extra support, you can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's a form on my website that you can fill out. I would love to help you thrive and just accept how you are wired. You know, when are we going to get to the point where it's really okay to be how we are and how we show up? And if we have wounding and we want different things, we can work towards those. But to really embrace who we are and how we're wired, that's really important. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to ask for what you want. You have a right to be hurt, disappointed. It's okay if people don't like you. You can set boundaries. It's okay to be dysregulated. It's okay to be joyful. It's okay to find things that bring you joy. And if financially it works for you to buy things that bring you joy, that works too. It's okay to ask to have your needs met. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to get what you want. It's okay to want to be with people. It's okay to not want to be with people. There's really no way of screwing this stuff up. If you're needing more structure and you struggle with routine or you want novelty, that's okay too. Just whatever is coming up for you is really okay. You have a right to be here, to have wants and needs, to have all of your feelings, to have reactions, to be uncomfortable, to be connected. All of those things are okay. I think that's all I have. I hope you're doing well. I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a blessed day.